The surgical knife trembled in Kotanaka's hands, not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from something far more dangerous. Rage. Under the operating room lights of Letterman General Hospital, a young American officer lay open on the table. Lieutenant James Crawford, United States Army Air Forces, 25 years old, internal bleeding from a training accident. His heart beat weakly beneath her gloved fingers, 52 beats per minute and falling. She had maybe 90 seconds to clamp the damaged vessel, or he would die on this table. But that wasn't what made her hands shake. It was the photograph, the one they had found in his jacket pocket when preparing him for surgery. A photograph taken from the cockpit of a B-29 bomber. An aerial view of a city burning. Orange flames bright against black night. Tokyo, March 10, 1945. Written in careful handwriting on the back. The night her father died. Ko's fingers tightened on the scalpel. The blade caught the light. Crawford's blood was hot on her surgical gloves, his life literally in her hands. She could save him. Or she could hesitate just a moment too long, make a mistake that looked like bad luck. No one would question it. The surgery was difficult. Complications happen. This was justice. This was karma. This was the universe offering her a chance to balance the scales. Dr. Robert Hayes stood beside her, his own hands trembling with the essential tremor that had been getting worse with age. He spoke quietly. "I need your hands for this one, Nurse Tanaka. Mine aren't steady enough tonight." The man who burned my city needs my hands to live, Ko thought. The man who killed my father is asking me to save him. She looked down at Crawford's unconscious face. Young, clean-shaven. He could have been one of the boys she had treated in the field hospitals on Saipan. Same age, same scared eyes behind their propaganda and promises. Ko took a breath, her hands steadied. She made the incision. "I'm ready, doctor," she said in careful English. But to understand how a 23-year-old Japanese nurse ended up in an American operating room holding the life of an enemy pilot in her hands, choosing mercy when revenge would have been so easy, we need to go back. Back 8 weeks. Back to the moment when 37 Japanese women stepped off a transport ship into a world that made no sense at all. September 15th, 1945. The USS Benevolence cut through morning fog as it approached San Francisco Bay. On deck, 37 Japanese women stood in tight formation, their white nursing uniforms stained with 14 months of war. Some were barely 20 years old. Others had gray streaking through their black hair pulled back in military buns that had long ago lost their precision. Ko Tanaka stood near the front of the line, 23 years old, 5 feet 2 inches tall, 87 pounds down from 115 before the war. Her hands bore scars from untreated infections. Her medical bag, clutched tightly to her chest, contained a few surgical instruments, a notebook with patient records in her careful handwriting, a photograph of her family in Kyoto, and something else, something sewn into the lining. A small glass vial, cyanide, the suicide pill they had all been given before deployment, just in case capture brought dishonor worse than death. She had never used it, had never even considered it seriously. But she kept it, a reminder of what her nation had expected her to choose. The Golden Gate Bridge rose before them through the fog, impossibly tall, untouched by war. Behind the nurses lay the smoking ruins of their country, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Tokyo reduced to ash. Here the bridge gleamed red-orange in the morning light, a monument to American industrial power that seemed to mock everything they had believed about their own nation's strength. They had been captured on Saipan 14 months earlier, pulled from collapsed hospital bunkers where they had treated dying soldiers until the very end. Some had hidden in caves for weeks drinking rainwater and eating wild roots, convinced that surrender meant immediate execution. When American Marines finally found them, they expected bayonets. Instead, they received water canteens and bandages for their bleeding feet. That had been the first crack in everything they believed, but it was nothing compared to what came next. The ship docked, the gangplank lowered, and the first thing that hit them was the smell, not the stench of death and decay they had lived with for months, but something clean and sharp, disinfectant, hospital-grade antiseptic mixed with the salt air of the bay. It was a smell that spoke of medicine, of healing, of systems that still functioned while their own nation's medical infrastructure had collapsed into chaos. Sounds drifted across the water. Car horns honking, the distant clang of cable cars climbing hills, voices calling out in English, that harsh and angular language their instructors had taught them to recognize as the tongue of demons. But the voices did not sound demonic. They sounded ordinary, human, alive, with a casual energy that felt alien to women who had spent years surrounded by death. Ko walked down the gangplank, her canvas shoes making soft sounds against wood. She could see the city spreading before them. Buildings stood intact. Windows gleamed with glass. People walked freely on the streets, not hurrying between bomb shelters, not huddling in burned-out ruins. This was what victory looked like. This was what their nation had failed to achieve. The difference was staggering. American soldiers lined the dock, but their rifles were slung casually over their shoulders. They did not point them at the nurses. They simply watched faces showing curiosity rather than hatred. One young private even gave a small nod as the women passed, as though acknowledging their shared humanity. Beside Koyuki, Yamamoto whispered in Japanese, careful to keep her voice low. At 31, she was one of the oldest, a veteran of the war in China before being transferred to the Pacific. Ko-san, what do you think they will do to us? Ko did not answer immediately. She thought of the propaganda films they had been shown. Images of American soldiers bayoneting prisoners, stories of torture and degradation. But she also remembered the Marine who had given her water on Saipan, who had looked at her with something that might have been pity. I don't know, she finally replied, but we are still breathing. That is more than I expected. They were loaded onto military buses with hard seats and windows covered with mesh wire. The buses rumbled through San Francisco streets, and the nurses pressed their faces to the wire, staring at a world that seemed to come from another planet. Grocery stores with food displayed in windows. Women in colorful dresses, not the drab work uniforms that had become standard in Japan. Children laughing as they ran down sidewalks, not thin and hollow, like the children they remembered. How can this be? Someone whispered. We bombed Pearl Harbor. We killed their soldiers. Why does their country look untouched? Because we lost, another nurse replied bitterly. Because everything we were told was a lie. The buses pulled up to Letterman General Hospital, a sprawling complex of white buildings overlooking the bay. The nurses were lined up outside a processing center, hearts pounding, as they waited to enter. This is where it begins, Ko thought. This is where they will humiliate us, break us, make us pay for what our nation did. But when they entered the building, they found something unexpected. Medical examination rooms, not interrogation chambers. Clean white walls. Medical equipment that looked almost new, not the rusted and broken instruments they had worked with for the past year. American nurses moved efficiently through the space, their white uniforms crisp and clean, their faces showing professional detachment rather than cruelty. One by one, the Japanese nurses were called into examination rooms. Ko's turn came, and she stepped forward with her jaw clenched, prepared for the worst. Dr. Robert Hayes sat waiting, a man in his mid-40s with brown hair showing the first streaks of gray. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were gentle. He gestured for her to sit. He spoke in English, and a Japanese-American translator, a young Nisei woman named Mary Tanaka, conveyed his words. We need to check your health, Mary translated. Make sure you don't have tuberculosis or other infectious diseases. This is standard procedure for all prisoners of war. Ko stared at the doctor as he examined her with practiced efficiency. He checked her lungs, her heartbeat, looked at the infected cuts on her hands and feet. When he finished, he wrote something in a chart and spoke to Mary again. You are malnourished and have signs of several infections. Mary translated. We will treat these conditions. You will receive antibiotics and proper nutrition. Ko felt tears prick her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not cry in front of the enemy. She simply nodded and left the room, her mind reeling. Antibiotics. They were going to give her antibiotics. Medicine that had become impossible to find in Japan. Medicine she had watched men die for lack of. And here the Americans were offering it to prisoners. After the medical examinations, they were led to shower facilities. Real showers with hot water and soap. Not the cold buckets of seawater they had used on Saipan, but actual running water heated to a comfortable temperature. The soap smelled like lavender, a scent so clean and gentle, it made several nurses weep as they washed away months of accumulated grime. Yuki stood under the shower spray, her head tilted back, water running over her face. "This is not right," she said quietly to Ko, who was in the next stall. "They should be punishing us, not cleaning us. What game are they playing?" "I don't think it's a game," Ko replied, scrubbing at her arms with the soft soap. "I think this is simply how they do things." The realization frightened her more than cruelty would have, because it meant that everything they had been taught about American devils was wrong. And if that was wrong, what else was wrong? What other lies had they been told? After showering, the nurses were given clean clothes. Not prison uniforms, but simple cotton dresses and comfortable shoes. Then they were led to a dining hall that smelled of food. Real food, hot food. The scent hit them like a physical force, and several nurses actually stopped walking, overwhelmed by what they were experiencing. The dining hall was large and clean with long tables and chairs. American hospital staff moved through the space serving food from metal trays. The nurses lined up, their hands shaking as they accepted plates loaded with scrambled eggs, toast with butter, slices of ham, fresh fruit, and cups of real coffee with cream and sugar available on the side. Ko stared at her plate. She had not seen this much food in one meal in over a year. In the final months before capture, their rations had consisted of rice mixed with sawdust, thin miso soup made from seaweed, sometimes a small piece of dried fish if they were lucky. Many days they had eaten nothing at all, giving their portions to wounded soldiers who needed strength to survive. She sat at a table with Yuki and several other nurses, all of them staring at their food in disbelief. "Is it poison?" someone whispered. "Is this a trick before they kill us?" "The American servers are eating the same food," Yuki observed, nodding toward the kitchen staff who were filling their own plates from the same containers. "If it's poison, they're poisoning themselves." Ko picked up her fork, her hand trembling. She cut a small piece of scrambled eggs and brought it to her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Rich, creamy, seasoned with butter and salt. She closed her eyes and a tear rolled down her cheek. She could not help it. The simple act of eating real food after so long was overwhelming. Around the table, the other nurses began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing hunger. Some wept openly as they ate, unable to contain their emotions. Others ate in silence, their faces showing the conflict raging inside them. They were enemies. They had treated soldiers who killed Americans. They had supported a war that brought death to thousands. And yet here they sat, being fed like honored guests, while back home their families likely starved in the ruins of bombed cities. "How can we accept this?" a young nurse named Sachiko whispered, staring at her half-eaten toast. "My brother died on Iwo Jima. He starved to death in a cave because we had no food left to send. And here I sit eating butter and ham from the enemy who killed him. What kind of person does that make me?" "It makes you alive," Yuki said quietly. "It makes you human. And maybe that's what we were supposed to forget, that we are human, and so are they." The meal continued in relative silence, each nurse lost in her own thoughts, wrestling with the impossible contradiction of being treated with dignity by those they had been taught to see as devils. When they finished, an American officer stood and addressed them through Mary the translator. "You will be housed in quarters here at the hospital. You will be given work assignments tomorrow. You are prisoners of war and will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. That means you will be fed, clothed, and given medical care. You will work, but you will be paid a small wage for your labor. You will be allowed to write letters home, though they will be censored. You will not be mistreated." The nurses listened, their faces showing disbelief. Paid for labor, letters home, medical care. This was not captivity as they had imagined it. This was something else entirely. That evening, they were shown to their quarters. Not prison cells, but dormitory-style rooms with real beds, clean sheets, wool blankets, and pillows. Each bed had a small nightstand with a lamp. There were windows with curtains, not bars. A shared bathroom with multiple sinks, toilets, and showers. It was more comfortable than the barracks they had lived in during their military service in Japan. Ko sat on her bed that night, running her hand over the clean white sheets. They smelled of soap and starch. The pillow was soft beneath her head. Outside the window, she could see the lights of San Francisco twinkling in the darkness. A city alive and functioning, while Tokyo lay in ruins. The contrast was almost unbearable. Around her, the other nurses settled into their beds, whispering quietly to one another. Some wrote in small journals they had managed to keep. Others simply lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what was happening to them. Yuki sat on the edge of her bed, her face thoughtful. Do you remember what they told us in training? That Americans were beasts who would rape and murder us if we were captured. That death was preferable to surrender. Ko nodded slowly. I remember. We were told they would torture us for information, that they had no honor, no sense of human decency. But today they gave us soap and butter, Yuki said quietly. They gave us medicine and clean beds. They asked about our health and treated our wounds. If these are beasts, then what does that make those who lied to us? The question hung in the air unanswered. Outside, the American night hummed with life. Cars passed on distant streets. A radio somewhere played music. That strange jazz sound that Americans loved. The world continued indifferent to the internal crisis unfolding in the hearts of 37 Japanese women who had just discovered that everything they believed might have been wrong. Ko fell asleep that night with one question burning in her mind. If the Americans were not the devils she had been taught to fear, then who were the real enemies? The days settled into a pattern that was both surreal and strangely comforting. Each morning a bell rang at 6 o'clock, waking the nurses from sleep that came easier than it had in years. They would rise, wash, and dress in the clean clothes provided to them, then make their way to the dining hall for breakfast. Always there was hot food, oatmeal with brown sugar, eggs, toast, fruit, coffee, more food than they could eat. And yet the servers never chastised them for leaving portions uneaten. After breakfast, they were divided into work groups. Some were assigned to laundry duty, washing and folding hospital linens. Others worked in the kitchen, preparing food or cleaning dishes. A few were given janitorial tasks, mopping floors and cleaning windows. The work was not difficult, especially compared to the desperate conditions they had worked under during the war. And true to the officer's word, they were paid. Small amounts of camp script that they could use at a canteen stocked with items they had not seen in years. Ko was assigned to the laundry, initially folding sheets and towels in a steamy room that smelled of detergent. She worked alongside other nurses. Their conversations conducted in quiet Japanese, always aware that guards stood nearby, even if those guards seemed more bored than threatening. But on the third day, something changed. Dr. Hayes, the same man who had examined her during processing, approached her while she was folding sheets. Through Mary the translator, he said something that made her freeze in place. I understand you were trained as a surgical nurse. Is that correct? Ko stared at him, uncertain how to respond. Yes, she finally said through the translator. I trained at Tokyo Imperial University Hospital. I assisted in surgical procedures for 2 years before I was conscripted. The doctor nodded. We are understaffed. We have wounded soldiers arriving every day from the Pacific Theater. Some of them need immediate surgery to survive. I would like to ask if you and some of the other trained nurses would be willing to assist in the surgical ward. Ko felt the world tilt beneath her feet. He was asking, not ordering, not demanding, asking, and not asking her to clean or cook, but to do the work she had trained for, the work she was good at, the work that gave her purpose. She looked at Mary, then back at the doctor, searching his face for signs of a trick, but she saw only tired eyes and genuine need. I will do it, she heard herself say. I will help. Dr. Hayes smiled, the first real smile she had seen from an American. Thank you. Report to the surgical ward tomorrow morning at 7. Bring any other nurses with surgical training. We need all the help we can get. That night, Ko shared the news with the others. Several nurses had surgical training. Yuki had been an emergency room nurse in Osaka. Sachiko had worked in a field hospital in China. Another named Hana had specialized in burn treatment. Together they discussed what the request meant. They want us to save American lives, Sachiko said, her voice uncertain. The lives of men who fought against our country. Is that not betrayal? We are nurses, Yuki replied firmly. We took an oath to heal, not to judge. If they're asking us to do what we were trained to do, then we should do it. She paused, then added more quietly, besides, what choice do we have? We are prisoners. If we refuse, what happens to us? But Ko knew the truth was more complex. They did have a choice. Dr. Hayes had asked, not ordered, and that asking carried its own weight, its own burden of responsibility. If they agreed, they were choosing to help the enemy. But if they refused, they were choosing to let men die when they had the skills to save them. There was no easy answer, no clear path that did not involve moral compromise. I will go tomorrow, Ko said finally. Anyone who wishes to join me is welcome. Anyone who does not, I will not judge. We have all lost too much to judge each other for the choices we make now. She lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. In her medical bag, hidden in the lining, was the small glass vial, the cyanide pill, the escape route she had been given, the choice her nation had wanted her to make if capture brought dishonor. But what was dishonor? Was it more dishonorable to help enemies live or to let them die when you had the power to save them? Was it more dishonorable to accept mercy from those who had destroyed your city or to choose death out of stubborn pride? She did not know, but she knew that tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock she would put on surgical scrubs and stand in an operating room. She would hand instruments to Dr. Hayes. She would help save the life of a young American soldier. And somehow that felt right. More right than anything had felt in years. But what Ko did not know as she finally drifted off to sleep was that the first patient she would help save would be the man who destroyed her city. And when she discovered his identity, she would have to make a choice that would haunt her for 50 years. A choice between the oath she had taken and the grief she carried, between the nurse she was trained to be and the daughter who had lost everything. That choice was coming in just 7 days, and it would change everything. The surgical ward at Letterman General Hospital smelled different from the laundry room. Not the clean scent of detergent and steam, but something sharper, antiseptic mixed with blood, the metallic tang of fear and pain. The peculiar odor of human bodies opened and exposed under bright lights. Ko stood in the scrub room at 7 o'clock that October morning, watching her hands disappear under hot water and surgical soap. She scrubbed to her elbows, counting 3 full minutes as she had been trained. Beside her, Yuki did the same. Neither spoke. The ritual of preparation was too familiar, too sacred to interrupt with words. Through the window, Ko could see the operating room. Dr. Hayes was already there reviewing charts with an American nurse. His hands, she noticed, had a slight tremor, even when he thought no one was watching. How long had he been working? How many young men had he tried to save? How many had he lost? Mary Tanaka. The translator appeared in the doorway. She wore surgical scrubs like the rest of them. Dr. Hayes asked me to assist today, she explained in Japanese, in case there are questions about procedures or terminology. Ko nodded. She understood the real reason. Dr. Hayes wanted to make sure there were no misunderstandings, no mistakes that could cost a life because of a language barrier. They entered the operating room, 6 of them now. Dr. Hayes, 2 American nurses, Keo, Yuki, and Mary. The patient was already on the table, sedated, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of anesthesia. Private James Sullivan, 20 years old, from Boston. Severe abdominal wounds from shrapnel. Injured at Iwo Jima 3 months ago. Multiple surgeries already. Infection spreading. This was his last chance. Dr. Hayes looked at Ko over his surgical mask. His eyes were kind but exhausted. We will begin with exposure of the peritoneal cavity, he said, his words translated quickly by Mary. I need you to hand instruments and manage retraction. Can you do this? Yes, doctor, Ko replied in English. The words felt strange in her mouth, but they came. The surgery began. Ko fell into the rhythm immediately. Scalpel, clamp, suction, retractor. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The familiar dance of surgery, the precise movements, the anticipation of what the surgeon would need before he asked for it. Dr. Hayes worked steadily, his hands more controlled now that he was focused on the task. He spoke little, but when he did, his instructions were clear. Ko found herself understanding not just his words, but his intentions. The way he angled his wrist before making a cut. The slight pause that meant he needed better visualization. 4 hours passed. The infection was worse than expected. Pockets of pus throughout the abdominal cavity. Damaged tissue that had to be carefully debrided. Blood vessels that needed repair. But slowly, methodically, they cleaned it out. Removed the dead tissue. Flushed with saline. Applied antibiotics directly to the affected areas. When it was finished, when Private Sullivan was stable and being moved to recovery, Dr. Hayes pulled down his mask and looked at Ko. Excellent work, Nurse Tanaka. You have excellent technique. I can tell you trained well. The praise hit Ko harder than she expected. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged her skills, her training, her value as something other than a tool or a burden. She felt her throat tighten, but kept her voice steady. Thank you, doctor. That night, lying in her bed, Ko replayed the surgery in her mind. She had saved an American life, a boy from Boston who would now go home to his mother, write letters to a girl he loved, maybe have children someday, live a life that her skills had made possible. Was that betrayal? She had helped the enemy, but the oath she had taken as a nurse made no distinctions about nationality. Heal the sick, comfort the dying, save lives when possible. Her father had been a doctor. He had taught her that a healer does not choose who lives and who dies based on politics or borders. A healer chooses life, always life. But he had also died in the flames of Tokyo, burned alive by Americans. And now his daughter was using her skills to save those same Americans. What would he think of her? Would he understand, or would he see her as a traitor? She did not know, but she knew she would be back in that operating room tomorrow, and the day after, because this was what she was trained to do. And maybe in some ways she did not fully understand this was how she honored her father's memory, by choosing life over death, healing over hatred. Over the following days, Ko and the other Japanese nurses became regular members of the surgical team. They worked alongside American nurses and doctors, their skills earning respect even from those who had been initially hostile. In the operating room, competence mattered more than nationality. When a patient was dying on the table, no one cared that the hands passing instruments were Japanese. They cared only that those hands were steady and skilled. But not everyone was pleased with this arrangement. Sergeant Thomas Harper first appeared in the surgical ward on Ko's seventh day. He did not announce himself, simply stood in the observation window, watching them work. Ko noticed him during a brief pause between procedures, a tall man with broad shoulders that seemed to carry an invisible weight. His hair was brown mixed with gray, cut in a military style. His eyes were pale blue and cold. After the surgery, Dr. Hayes introduced them. Sergeant Harper is conducting security assessments of all prisoners working in sensitive areas of the hospital, he explained through Mary. Standard procedure, he will want to interview each of you. Harper's interview with Ko took place the next day in a small office. He sat across a desk from her, Mary translating between them. On the desk, Ko noticed were two photographs. Both showed young men in military uniforms. Both had Harper's eyes. Nurse Tanaka, Harper began, his voice polite but without warmth. I have reviewed your file. Tokyo Imperial University Hospital. Impressive credentials for someone so young. Ko said nothing, waiting. I am responsible for ensuring that no security breaches occur at this facility. Harper continued. You understand that this hospital contains sensitive information about American military medical procedures. I need to ensure there are no risks. I understand, Sergeant, Ko replied through Mary. I am simply doing my job as a nurse. Harper's eyes did not change. Of course, but you understand my concern. Your people were quite inventive when it came to gathering intelligence during the war. Nurse spies were not uncommon in the Pacific Theater. The accusation was subtle but clear. He was suggesting she might be a spy, gathering information to send back to Japan, even though the war was over, even though Japan was occupied, even though there was no longer any military to send intelligence to. I am not a spy, Sergeant, Ko said quietly. I am a nurse who wishes to save lives. That is all. Harper picked up one of the photographs. This is David, my eldest son, 19 years old. He was killed on Iwo Jima, day 3 of the invasion. Sniper shot. He picked up the second photograph. This is Michael, 22, also Iwo Jima, bled out from shrapnel wounds on day 5. He set both photographs down carefully. My wife took an overdose of sleeping pills 6 months after we received the news. Could not live with the grief. Ko felt the weight of his loss settle over the room like a physical presence. She understood now why his eyes were so cold. He had lost everything. I'm sorry for your loss, Sergeant, she said and meant it. Are you? Harper's voice was still polite, still controlled. Sorry enough to have refused to treat wounded Japanese soldiers who were killing boys like mine? Or did you do your duty as a nurse, regardless of which side they fought for? The question was a trap. If she said she had refused to treat Japanese soldiers, she was admitting she made decisions based on nationality. If she said she treated them all, she was admitting she had helped Japan's war effort. I treated whoever needed treatment, Ko said finally, because that is what a nurse does. That is what the oath requires. Harper nodded slowly. Exactly. You did your duty, as I am doing mine. He paused. I will be recommending a full psychological evaluation of all Japanese nurses working in this hospital to determine if any pose security risks. The evaluation will take several weeks. During that time, you may be reassigned to other duties, away from sensitive areas. The threat was clear. He did not need to torture or harm them. He just needed to document concerns, file reports, create enough bureaucratic paper to have them removed from meaningful work, sent somewhere else, somewhere without clean beds and hot food and the purpose that made their captivity bearable. When Ko told the others about Harper that evening, Yuki's face darkened. "That man is dangerous," she said. "Not because he is cruel, but because he is smart, and he has legitimate reasons to hate us." "How do you fight against a father's grief?" Ko asked quietly. No one had an answer. The surgeries continued. Ko worked 6 days that week, assisting in procedures that ranged from routine to desperately complex. She learned the American way of doing things, which was different from her Japanese training, but not inferior. Just different. More resources, better equipment, a whole system built on the assumption that supplies would always be available. On day 10, an emergency case came in at 2 in the morning. Lieutenant James Crawford, Army Air Forces, training accident, massive internal bleeding, critical condition. KO was pulled from sleep, still groggy, as she rushed to the surgical ward. The case was already being prepped when she arrived. Dr. Hayes looked more tired than usual, his tremor more pronounced. They transferred Crawford to the operating table. As Ko helped remove his personal effects, a photograph fell from his jacket pocket. She bent to pick it up and froze. The photograph showed an aerial view, taken from high altitude, a city at night, buildings reduced to matchsticks, and flames, bright orange flames spreading across everything like a living thing. Ko turned the photograph over. Written in careful handwriting, Tokyo, March 10, 1945. The night of the firebombing. The night over 100,000 people died. The night her father died. This man, this Lieutenant Crawford lying on the table, he had been there. In one of those bombers. He had looked down at Tokyo burning and taken a photograph. Ko's hands began to shake. She stared at Crawford's unconscious face. He was young, maybe 25, clean-shaven, probably had a family waiting for him back home, probably had dreams and hopes and people who loved him, just like the 100,000 people who died in Tokyo, just like her father. Dr. Hayes called from across the room. "Nurse Tanaka, we need to begin. His blood pressure is dropping. We have maybe 90 minutes. Yuki, standing beside Ko, had seen the photograph. Her face went pale. She looked at Ko with wide eyes, a silent question. Ko stood there holding the photograph, feeling the weight of it in her hands. This piece of paper was proof. Evidence that the man on this table had participated in the murder of her father. He had been part of the machine that reduced Tokyo to ashes. She could let him die, make a mistake during surgery, hesitate at a critical moment. No one would question it. These things happened. Complications arose. This was justice. This was karma. This was the universe offering her a chance to balance the scales. Dr. Hayes approached, noticing her frozen posture. He saw the photograph in her hands. His face showed understanding, sympathy, but also urgency. "Nurse Tanaka," he said quietly, "I need your help with this surgery. My hands are not steady enough today. I need your hands, your skill." Ko looked at him, then back at Crawford, then at the photograph. She thought of her father, a gentle man who had dedicated his life to healing, who had taught her that a doctor's oath transcended all boundaries, that life was sacred regardless of whose life it was. She thought of the young Marine Private Sullivan, whose life she had saved, how his mother would have wept if he had died on a surgical table in San Francisco after surviving Iwo Jima. She thought of all the promises she had made, to her father, to herself, to the profession she had chosen. She set the photograph down carefully on the side table. She walked to the sink. She scrubbed her hands for 3 full minutes, counting each second. She put on surgical gloves. She picked up a scalpel. "I'm ready, doctor," she said. The surgery lasted 5 hours. Crawford's injuries were severe, internal bleeding from multiple sources, damaged organs, torn blood vessels, the kind of damage that required precise, delicate work. One mistake, and he would die. Ko's hands did not shake. Not once during those 5 hours. She made each incision with perfect precision, clamped each vessel with expert placement, sutured with tiny even stitches that would minimize scarring. Dr. Hayes guided her, but it was her hands doing the work. Her skills keeping Crawford alive. Her choice to save him despite knowing what he had done. At 7:30 in the morning, Crawford was stable. His heart beat steadily. His blood pressure had stabilized. He would live. He would recover. He would go home to whatever family was waiting for him. Dr. Hayes pulled down his mask and looked at Ko. "You saved his life, Nurse Tanaka. That was exceptional work." Ko felt tears behind her surgical mask but did not let them fall. Not here. Not now. She went to the locker room, sat on the bench, still wearing her blood-stained surgical gown, and finally let herself cry. She had saved the man who killed her father. And instead of feeling shame or guilt, she felt something else. Something she did not have words for. A sense that she had honored something important. Something bigger than revenge or nationality or politics. She had honored her oath. She had chosen life over death. She had proven that healing could transcend hatred. But the cost of that choice sat heavy in her chest, because she knew her father was still dead. Tokyo was still destroyed, and no amount of moral righteousness could change those facts. Yuki found her there an hour later, still sitting on the bench, staring at her hands. "Kosan," she said softly, "you did the right thing." "Did I?" Ko's voice was raw. "I saved the man who burned my city, who killed my father." "What kind of daughter does that?" "The kind who understands that revenge is a circle with no end," Yuki replied. "Your father was a healer. You honored his memory by choosing what he would have chosen. Life over death. Always." Ko knew Yuki was right. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. She had made the right choice, but it still hurt. 3 days later, Lieutenant Crawford woke up. The nurses had been monitoring his recovery, checking vital signs, changing bandages. He had remained unconscious through it all, his body healing slowly but steadily. Ko was checking the IV line in his arm when his eyes opened. He blinked several times, disoriented, then focused on her face. Recognition came slowly. She was wearing her nursing uniform, her name tag written in English, K. Tanaka Nurse. "Water," he croaked. Ko gave him ice chips, the standard procedure for patients just waking from surgery. He sucked on them gratefully. Mary was called to translate. When she arrived, Crawford had regained more alertness. He looked at Ko with an expression that was difficult to read. Confusion mixed with something else. Guilt, perhaps. "They told me," he said, his voice weak but clear, "that you saved my life, you and Dr. Hayes, but that you did most of the critical work." Ko nodded, saying nothing. "Why?" Crawford asked. Ko frowned. Mary translated the question into Japanese, though Ko had understood the English. "Why did you save me?" Crawford elaborated. "I'm the enemy. I dropped bombs on your cities. I have a photograph from Tokyo, March 10th. I was there." So he knew. He remembered the photograph. He knew what it meant. "I saw the photograph," Ko said in halting English, then continued in Japanese for Mary to translate. "I know what you did. I know you were there that night." Crawford's eyes filled with tears. "Then why did you save me? I killed people. Maybe I killed someone you knew, someone you loved. Why didn't you let me die?" Ko considered the question. It deserved an honest answer. "Because I am a nurse," she said finally, "and you are a human. That is all." "Well, that's all," Crawford's voice cracked. "Just that simple. My father died that night." Ko continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "March 10th, 1945. In the fires you helped create." Crawford's face went white. He tried to sit up, but was too weak. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "When I saw your photograph," Ko continued, "I wanted to let you die. I had stood there holding surgical instruments, and I wanted revenge. I wanted justice. But then I remembered something my father taught me. He was a doctor. He taught me that a healer does not choose who lives and who dies based on nationality or politics. A healer chooses life. Always life. So I chose. Not for you, not even for me, but for my father, to honor what he taught me, to prove that his lessons survived even when he did not." The room was silent except for the quiet beep of medical monitors. Crawford stared at Ko, tears running down his face. "I can't carry it anymore," he whispered. The photograph. Every night I dream about it. I see faces in the flames, children, old people, and I wake up screaming. He paused, struggling with words. Will you keep it, the photograph? I can't throw it away. That feels wrong, like forgetting, but I can't carry it either. It's too heavy. If you keep it, he continued, then someone will remember. Not just the fire, but why it happened. What it meant. Someone who understands both sides. Ko thought about this request. It was asking her to carry his burden as well as her own, to hold the evidence of her father's death, to remember not just her loss, but Crawford's guilt. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe someone needed to hold all of it, the grief and the guilt, the loss and the shame. Maybe that was how healing actually worked, not by forgetting, but by remembering honestly. I will keep it, Ko said, and I will remember, not with hate, but with truth. Crawford closed his eyes, relief visible on his face. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you. After Ko left his room, she found Yuki in the stairwell. She was crying, silent tears that she tried to hide when she heard Ko approach. Ko-san, Yuki said, what happened in there? He apologized. Ko replied, her own tears starting. The man who killed my father apologized. And it doesn't change anything. Father is still dead. Tokyo still burned. But somehow it means something. Is that wrong, she asked, to accept an apology from someone who destroyed everything? Yuki sat beside her on the stairs. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's human. And maybe that's all we can be. They sat together in silence, two Japanese nurses in an American hospital, carrying losses too big for words, trying to understand how mercy could coexist with grief. But their moment of peace did not last long. The next day, Sergeant Harper filed his report. Ko heard about it from Dr. Hayes, who called her into his office with a grave expression. Sergeant Harper has recommended that all Japanese nurses be reassigned from surgical duties, Dr. Hayes said through Mary. He believes there are security concerns. He wants you moved to other work, laundry, kitchen, areas without access to sensitive medical information. Ko felt something break inside her chest. The work in surgery was the only thing that gave her days meaning, the only way she could honor her training and her father's memory. Without it, she was just a prisoner again. Just someone being fed and housed until they could ship her back to the ruins of Japan. When she asked, the transfer order comes through in 1 week, Dr. Hayes said. His face showed genuine distress. I tried to argue against it. I told them you are the best technical nurse I have, that you saved lives, but Harper has legitimate authority here, and he has legitimate grief. I understand, Ko said quietly, but she did not understand. She had done everything right. She had saved American lives. She had chosen mercy over revenge. She had proven that Japanese prisoners could be trusted. And it still was not enough, because Harper's sons were still dead, and no amount of good work could bring them back. That night, Ko lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Around her, the other nurses slept, or pretended to sleep. They had all heard about Harper's report. They all knew what it meant. In 1 week, their lives would change again. Back to meaningless labor, back to being just bodies to be managed until repatriation. Ko thought about the cyanide pill still hidden in her medical bag. She had kept it all this time, a reminder of the choice her nation had wanted her to make. But she also thought about Private Sullivan healing in the recovery ward, about Lieutenant Crawford carrying a burden of guilt that might someday transform into something useful, about Dr. Hayes, who saw her as a colleague despite everything. Those things mattered, even if they did not matter enough to change Harper's mind, even if they did not matter enough to save her position in surgery. She had chosen to save lives, and that choice had value, even if no one else recognized it, even if it cost her everything. At 4 in the morning, 2 days later, alarm bells rang through the hospital. An accident on Highway 101, military transport vehicle, multiple casualties, all hands needed in the emergency room in surgical ward. Ko and the other nurses jumped from their beds, threw on their uniforms, and ran to the surgical ward. The scene was chaos, blood everywhere, wounded soldiers crying out, medical staff rushing in all directions. Dr. Hayes was already there triaging patients. Nurse Tanaka, he called when he saw her. Operating room 2, severe chest trauma, pneumothorax, needs immediate intervention. Ko ran to the operating room. As she entered, she saw the patient being transferred to the table. and her heart stopped. Sergeant Thomas Harper. He had been in one of the vehicles. A piece of metal had penetrated his chest when the truck rolled. He was conscious, barely coughing up blood. His lung was collapsing. Without immediate surgery, he would die within 10 minutes. When Harper saw Coe, his eyes widened. He tried to speak, but could only cough. Blood flecked his lips. Dr. Hayes entered right behind Coe. He assessed the situation instantly. "We need to operate now. Nurse Tanaka, I need you on this. My hands are too unsteady today. You're the best technical nurse I have." Coe stood frozen. This was the man who was destroying her career, who was sending her back to meaningless labor, who had called her a potential security risk. This was the man who had lost 2 sons at Iwo Jima, whose wife had killed herself from grief, who had legitimate reasons to hate every Japanese person he saw. This was the man whose life was now in her hands. Harper managed to speak, his voice weak and bubbling with blood. "No, not her. Get American nurses." Dr. Hayes leaned over him. "Sergeant, we don't have time for this. Your lung is collapsing. You'll die in 10 minutes if we don't operate now." "I don't want enemy hands inside me," Harper gasped. Coe could have walked away. She could have said, "Get someone else." No one could blame her. Harper had tried to destroy her. He had legitimate reasons to refuse her help. But she did not walk away. She stepped forward, looked down at Harper, and spoke to him directly in the English she had been learning. "Sergeant Harper, I know you lost sons. I lost father. We both hurt. But if I let you die, your sons die for nothing. If I save you, maybe one day you teach someone what war cost, what hate cost. I choose save you, not because I forget your sons, but because I remember my father. He taught me life is life." Harper stared at her, blood on his lips, death in his eyes, and slowly, very slowly, he nodded. Coe turned to Dr. Hayes. "I'm ready, doctor." The surgery took 3 hours, the most difficult Coe had ever assisted with. The metal had penetrated Harper's lung and nicked a major blood vessel. Every movement had to be precise, every stitch perfect. One mistake, and he would bleed out on the table. But Coe did not make mistakes. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. She saved Sergeant Harper's life not because she liked him, not because she forgave him, but because that was what a healer did. When it was over, when Harper was stable and being moved to recovery, Dr. Hayes looked at Coe with something like anyone in his eyes. "You saved him," he said, "a man who was trying to destroy you." "Why, because that is what healers do," Coe replied. "We save lives, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." 2 days later, Harper woke in his hospital bed. Coe came to check his vitals as she did for all post-surgical patients. He watched her work in silence, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you." Coe nodded, saying nothing. "My report," Harper continued, his voice still weak, "recommending your transfer. I'm withdrawing it." Coe stopped, looked at him. "Why?" Harper was quiet for a long moment. "Because you are better than me. You had every reason to let me die, but you saved me anyway. That's a kind of courage I don't have." He paused, struggling with emotion. "I've been so angry at the Japanese, at God, at myself for not being at Iwo Jima to save my boys, and that anger has been eating me alive. But you lost your father and you still chose mercy." How? Coe considered the question. "I choose mercy because anger is heavy, Sergeant, and I am tired of carrying heavy things." Harper reached to his bedside table, wincing from the pain. He pulled out 2 photographs. His sons, David and Michael. "Will you look at them?" he asked. "I want someone to see them as people, not just as casualties, not just as reasons for my hate." Coe took the photographs, studied them. 2 young men in uniform smiling. They looked like boys, like the Japanese soldiers she had treated on Saipan. Same age, same scared eyes behind the smiles. "They look like boys I treated in field hospitals," Coe said quietly. "Japanese boys, same age, same faces trying to look brave." Harper nodded, tears running down his face. "Yeah, I guess they were all just boys, weren't they? On both sides, just boys sent to kill each other by old men who stayed safe at home." Coe handed the photographs back. Harper held them for a moment, then looked at her. I'm sorry for what I tried to do, for letting my grief make me cruel. Your grief is not cruel, Ko said. Your grief is human. What you do with grief, that is the choice, weapon. Harper closed his eyes. You're right, and I've been making the wrong choice. 3 days later, a different kind of order came through. Not Harper's recommendation to remove the Japanese nurses from surgical duties, but a commendation signed by Harper himself, recommending that Ko Tanaka and the other surgical nurses be recognized for their exceptional service. Dr. Hayes showed Ko the document, smiling for the first time in weeks. This changes everything, he said. You're not just prisoners now. You're valued members of this hospital staff. But even as Ko felt relief, another kind of notice arrived. Repatriation orders. All Japanese prisoners of war would begin returning to Japan in 6 weeks. By February 1946, they would all be gone. Ko had saved lives. She had chosen mercy. She had built something meaningful here. And now it was ending. Whether she wanted it to or not, she was going home. Back to the ruins. Back to a country that would see her as tainted. Back to a future she could not predict or control. But for now, for these last 6 weeks, she would keep working, keep saving lives, keep proving that healing could transcend hatred, because that was what her father had taught her. That was what her oath required. And somehow in this strange American hospital, surrounded by former enemies who had become colleagues, she had found a way to honor both. The assembly hall at Letterman General Hospital was crowded on the morning of December 3, 1945. All 37 Japanese nurses stood in neat rows, their faces showing a mixture of emotions that Ko could not quite name. Not quite fear, not quite relief. Something more complicated. An American officer stood at the front reading from an official document. His voice was clear and formal, each word carrying the weight of bureaucracy and policy. Effective February 15, 1946, all Japanese prisoners of war currently held at facilities within the continental United States will begin repatriation to Japan. You will board transport ships at San Francisco port. The journey will take approximately 2 weeks. You will arrive at Yokohama and be processed by occupation authorities before being released to return to your families. Ko stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her. She should feel joy. She should feel relief. She was going home. After 14 months of captivity, she would see her mother again, her sister, whatever remained of her family. But instead, she felt something that scared her. She felt dread. Beside her, Yuki whispered in Japanese, barely audible. Kosan, what home are we returning to? Tokyo is rubble. Our families are starving. We go from eating 3 meals a day to wondering if we will eat at all. On Ko's other side, Sachiko spoke even more quietly. We will be judged. They will call us traitors for surviving, for cooperating, for accepting their mercy. The paradox was suffocating. They should be desperate to leave captivity. They should be counting the days until freedom. But instead, many of them were counting the days until they lost everything they had built here. Here, they had purpose, meaningful work. They were treated with respect and dignity. They had clean beds and hot food and medicine, and the simple human need to feel useful. What waited for them in Japan judgment from those who would see them as tainted? Poverty and starvation in a defeated nation, and worst of all, the burden of truth. The truth that everything they had been taught was a lie. The truth that the enemy had shown them more humanity than their own people ever had. That night, Ko received a letter. It had taken 3 months to arrive, passed through military censors, delayed by the chaos of occupation. The envelope was worn and stained. The paper inside was thin, almost translucent, written in her mother's shaky handwriting. Ko sat on her bed and read it slowly, each word, a knife cutting into her chest. Your father died in the firebombing. Your sister survived, but lost her husband on Okinawa. She has 2 children to feed and no way to feed them. We live in a shelter made of tin sheets. We eat whatever we can find. The occupation forces give us some food, but it is not enough. Come home if you can. We need you. Ko read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in her medical bag next to the photograph of her family that she had carried since Saipan, next to Crawford's photograph of Tokyo burning, next to the small glass vial that she still had not thrown away. Her father was dead. She had known this since Crawford had confirmed the date, but seeing it written in her mother's hand made it real in a way that knowing had not. Her sister was a widow with 2 children. Her mother was living in a tin shack eating whatever scraps could be found in the ruins. And Ko was here, sleeping in a clean bed, eating 3 meals a day, working in a modern hospital with equipment and supplies, and the luxury of being able to save lives instead of watching them slip away for lack of medicine. The guilt was crushing. But beneath the guilt was something else. Anger. Anger at the leaders who had brought this upon Japan. Anger at the propaganda that had convinced millions to die for nothing. Anger at a system that had valued death over life, sacrifice over survival, glory over the simple human need to live and build and create. In the weeks that followed, Ko threw herself into her work with even greater intensity. If she only had 2 more months here, she would make them count. She would save as many lives as she could. She would prove that her time here had meant something. Lieutenant Crawford was released from the hospital in mid-December, recovered enough to return to duty. Before he left, he came to find Ko. She was in the surgical ward cleaning instruments between procedures. "Nurse Tanaka," he said, and Mary appeared to translate. "I want to give you something before I go." He held out an envelope. Ko looked at it but did not take it. "What is this?" she asked. "Money," Crawford said. "For your family. I heard you received a letter about your mother and sister. I want to help." Ko recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "I cannot accept this." Crawford looked confused. "Why not?" "You saved my life. This is the least I can do." "If I accept money from you," Ko said, her voice tight, "it confirms what they will say about me, that I cooperated with the enemy for personal gain, that I betrayed my country for money and food." "But that's not true," Crawford protested. "You saved me because you're a good nurse, a good person." "Truth does not matter," Ko replied. "Only appearance matters. I must return to Japan with clean hands. Otherwise, I cannot face my family. I cannot face my father's memory." Crawford looked stricken. He lowered the envelope but did not put it away. "Then let me send it anonymously, through the Red Cross, to your family directly. You don't have to know where it came from." Ko considered this. It would help her family, her mother, her sister's children who were starving. But she would know. Even if no one else did, she would know it came from the man who dropped bombs on Tokyo. Could she live with that? Before she could answer, Dr. Hayes entered the room. He saw the tension between them and understood immediately. "Nurse Tanaka, Lieutenant Crawford." "May I speak?" Both turned to him. Dr. Hayes chose his words carefully. "Lieutenant Crawford wants to help your family, Nurse Tanaka, and I believe he should be allowed to, but not as payment for services rendered, as an act of reconciliation. What if we establish a fund," he continued, "not just from Lieutenant Crawford, but from all the soldiers whose lives you and the other nurses saved. A collective thank you, sent through official military channels to families of medical personnel in Japan. It would not be a secret. It would be documented, official, a program of medical workers helping medical workers across borders. No one could call it betrayal. It would be what it is. Gratitude from those whose lives were saved to the families of those who saved them." Ko thought of her mother's letter, thought of her sister's children, thought of all the Japanese families starving while Americans had plenty. "If it is official," she said slowly, "if it is documented, if it is for all families, not just mine, then yes, I will accept." Crawford's face showed relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Thank you for saving me and for letting me help even in this small way." After he left, Dr. Hayes stayed behind. He looked at Ko with an expression she had not seen before, something like fatherly concern. "You are going to be fine, Nurse Tanaka," he said through Mary. "I know you are worried about returning to Japan, but you have skills, you have training, you have integrity. Those things will carry you through whatever comes next." Ko felt tears prick her eyes but kept them from falling. "Thank you, doctor, for everything, for trusting me, for seeing me as a nurse first." "That is all you ever were," Dr. Hayes replied. "All you ever will be, a healer. And the world always needs healers." The weeks passed too quickly. Ko worked every day, sometimes 12 or 14 hours. She assisted in surgeries. She trained American nurses in techniques she had learned in Japan. She wrote detailed notes about treatment protocols, hoping they might be useful to someone someday. She also spent time in the canteen using her small wages to buy chocolate and soap and small gifts for her family. things that were impossible to find in Japan, things that might make their lives a little easier. On February 10th, 1946, the 37 nurses boarded a transport ship bound for Yokohama. The journey that had brought them here in fear now reversed in uncertainty. Then they had expected death. Now they expected judgment. The ship cut through rough winter seas. Many of the nurses got seasick, but Ko spent hours on deck watching America disappear behind them. She thought about everything that had happened in those 5 months. The surgeries, the meals, the clean beds, the simple dignity of being treated as a person rather than an enemy. She thought about Dr. Hayes and his trembling hands, his kind eyes, his belief that healing transcended all boundaries. She thought about Crawford and his burden of guilt. She thought about Harper and his transformation from enemy to grudging ally. She thought about all the lives they had saved. American boys who would go home to their families, who would have children and grandchildren, who would build lives that her skills had made possible. Was that betrayal, or was that the truest form of patriotism, choosing life over death, healing over hatred, the future over the past? She did not know, but she knew she would carry these questions for the rest of her life. The ship approached Yokohama on February 25th, 1946. Ko and the other nurses stood on deck staring at the coastline. What they saw was worse than anything they had imagined. The destruction was total. Entire cities reduced to fields of rubble. What had once been vibrant urban centers were now wastelands of broken concrete and twisted metal. Here and there, structures still stood, but they were skeletal remains, burned out husks that served as tombstones for a nation that had killed itself pursuing empire. Sachiko began to cry, quietly at first, then with great shaking sobs. "This is what we fought for," she whispered. "This is what they told us was worth dying for." No one had an answer. They disembarked at Yokohama port. Japanese officials processed them with bureaucratic efficiency. There were no celebrations, no welcome home ceremonies, just paperwork and questions that felt like accusations. Did you cooperate with the enemy? Did you provide information? Did you work for them? Ko answered honestly. "Yes, I worked in their hospital. I helped save American lives. I did the work I was trained to do as a nurse." The official's face showed disapproval. He stamped her papers, moved on to the next nurse. Ko understood what that look meant. She was tainted now. She had survived captivity. She had cooperated with the enemy. She had done things that could be interpreted as betrayal. She would carry that stain forever. The journey from Yokohama to Kyoto took 3 days. It should have been 1 day, but the trains ran sporadically. The tracks were damaged in places. The stations were crowded with displaced people searching for lost family members. Ko traveled with Yuki and Sachiko. They did not speak much. There was too much to process, too much grief in the landscape passing by their windows. Burned villages, destroyed bridges, fields left fallow because there was no one left to work them. When Ko finally reached Kyoto, she found the address her mother had given in the letter. Not their old house. That had burned, but a temporary shelter in what used to be a public park. The structure was made of salvaged tin sheets and scraps of wood, a lean-to that barely qualified as shelter. Ko stood outside it for a long moment, gathering courage. Then she called out, "Mother, it is Ko. I have come home." The woman who emerged from the shelter was almost unrecognizable. Ko's mother had aged decades in the years Ko had been gone. She was thin, her face gaunt, her hair completely gray. Her clothes were patched and repatched. Her hands were rough from labor. But when she saw Ko, she wept and pulled her into an embrace that felt like it might break them both. "You survived," her mother whispered. "Thank the ancestors. You survived." That night, sitting in the cramped shelter with her mother and sister and 2 small nieces she had never met, Ko tried to explain where she had been, what had happened to her. But when her mother asked if she had been mistreated, Ko found she could not tell the truth. How could she explain that she had been treated well, that she had eaten better than her family had eaten in years, that the enemy had shown her more respect and dignity than her own nation ever had? So she said simply, "I survived, Mother. That is all that matters." Her sister Keiko looked at her with hollow eyes. "My husband died on Okinawa," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "He was 26 years old. We were married for 3 years. These are his daughters. They will never remember him. The two little girls, 4 and 2 years old, stared at Ko with the wide eyes of children who have known only hunger and fear. They did not smile. They did not play. They simply existed, waiting for the next meal that might not come. Ko reached into her bag and pulled out the chocolate bars she had bought at the canteen. American chocolate. Hershey's. The girls had never seen anything like it. She unwrapped one bar and broke it into pieces, gave some to each child. They ate slowly, their eyes closing with pleasure at the sweetness. "Where did you get this?" Keiko asked, suspicion in her voice. "From the Americans," Ko said quietly. "They paid us for our work. I saved money to buy things for you." Keiko's face hardened. "You worked for them? You took their money?" "I was a nurse," Ko said. "I did what nurses do. I saved lives." "American lives," Keiko said. "While Japanese soldiers died for lack of medical care. While our people starved. You saved Americans." The accusation hung in the air. Ko had no defense. Because it was true. She had saved American lives while Japanese people suffered. The fact that she had no choice, that she was a prisoner, that she was simply doing her duty as a nurse, none of that mattered. "I am sorry," Ko said. "I am sorry I could not save Father. I am sorry I could not save your husband. I am sorry for everything." Keiko looked away. "We are all sorry, but sorry does not bring them back." Ko returned to nursing, working in a small clinic that had been set up in the ruins of Kyoto. The conditions were primitive compared to what she had experienced in America. They had few supplies, little medicine, and constant shortages of everything. But she worked with what she had, saving lives where she could, comforting the dying when she could not, treating infections with honey when there was no penicillin, setting broken bones without anesthesia, delivering babies in the dark because there was no electricity. It was a brutal work, heartbreaking work, but it was necessary work, and Ko was good at it. The years passed. Japan rebuilt slowly, painfully under American occupation. The irony was not lost on Ko that the same nation that had destroyed Japan was now helping to rebuild it. American doctors ran hospitals in Tokyo. American supplies fed Japanese children. American money rebuilt Japanese infrastructure. Sometimes Ko saw American soldiers in the streets of Kyoto. She wondered if any of them had been at Letterman Hospital, if any of them knew Dr. Hayes. She never approached them. That part of her life was over, closed, something she carried silently. In 1952, Ko married Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a surgeon who had also survived the war. He had been a military doctor in China, had seen horrors that he did not talk about. They understood each other in the way that only survivors can. Both carrying burdens they could not share with those who had not been there. They had 3 children, a son born in 1953, a daughter born in 1955, another son born in 1957. Ko raised them with love and strictness, teaching them the values her father had taught her. Respect for life, the importance of healing, the duty to help others regardless of who they were. But she never told them the full story of her time in America. It was too complicated, too dangerous in a society still processing its defeat and occupation. So she gave them edited versions. She had been a prisoner. She had worked in a hospital. The Americans had followed the Geneva Convention. That was all. What she did not tell them was how the Americans had treated her, how they had seen her as a colleague rather than an enemy, how she had learned that healing could transcend hatred, how she had saved the life of the man who destroyed Tokyo. Those truths were too complex, too likely to be misunderstood. So Ko carried them silently year after year, a secret history that lived only in her memory. Spring 1985. Ko Tanaka was 63 years old, retired from nursing, living in Kyoto with her husband. Their children were grown, scattered across Japan with families of their own. Life was quiet, comfortable. The war was 40 years in the past, a historical event that young people learned about in school but did not truly understand. On an April morning, a letter arrived, international postage, from America. Ko's hands trembled as she opened it. She had not received a letter from America in nearly 40 years. Inside was a handwritten letter on official medical stationery. The handwriting was shaky but clear, an old person's handwriting, careful and deliberate. "Dear Nurse Tanaka," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well. I am Dr. Robert Hayes, now 85 years old and retired. I have spent the past 2 years trying to locate you and the other nurses who worked with me at Letterman Hospital. Coe's heart began to race. Dr. Hayes. After all these years, he had remembered her. He had looked for her. I have never forgotten the skill and dedication you showed during those months. You were one of the finest nurses I ever worked with. More than that, you taught me something I had forgotten after years of war, that healing transcends hatred, that mercy is not weakness, but the truest form of strength. I have told your story many times over the years, how Japanese prisoners of war helped save American lives, not because they were forced to, but because they were healers who understood that life transcends politics. I have enclosed photographs from that time. One shows you in the surgical ward. I thought you might want it. I hope you continued your work as a nurse. I hope you found peace. The world needs more people like you. With deep respect and gratitude, Dr. Robert Hayes. Coe pulled out the photographs. There were 3 of them, all black and white, grainy but clear. The first showed the surgical ward at Letterman Hospital. Coe recognized it immediately. The equipment, the layout, the feeling of the space. The second showed a group photo, American and Japanese medical staff together, Dr. Hayes in the center, Coe and Yuki and the other Japanese nurses standing beside American nurses, all in surgical scrubs, all looking tired but somehow content. The third photograph showed Coe and Dr. Hayes working together in an operating room. Coe's hands held instruments. Dr. Hayes guided her. Between them, a patient on the table. Coe stared at the photograph for a long time. She had not seen this moment from outside her own eyes before. She looked professional, competent, confident. She looked like a nurse, not a prisoner, not an enemy, a nurse. Coe sat at her kitchen table holding the letter and photographs. Tears streamed down her face. 40 years of silence, of carrying this story alone, of wondering if what she had done was right or wrong, betrayal or duty, and now this letter. From the man who had seen her not as enemy, not as prisoner, but as colleague, as healer, as equal. Kenji, she called to her husband, come here. I need to tell you something. I need to tell you everything. That evening, Coe told her husband the full story for the first time. About the Americans, the hospital, the food, the dignity. About Crawford and the photograph from Tokyo. About Harper and his sons. About choosing mercy when revenge would have been easier. Kenji listened in silence. When she finished, he took her hand. You should tell the children and the grandchildren. They need to know. What if they think I betrayed Japan? Coe asked. You honored your oath, Kenji replied. That is not betrayal, that is integrity, and they need to know that such integrity is possible even in war, especially in war. Coe invited all her children and grandchildren to dinner the following month. Her granddaughter Yuki, named after Coe's old friend who had died in 1972, was there. 22 years old, a medical student at Kyoto University, brilliant and determined. After dinner, Coe told them the story, all of it. She showed them Dr. Hayes's letter, the photographs, Crawford's picture from Tokyo that she had kept all these years, her old nursing bag with the hidden compartment where the cyanide pill had once been. Her grandson asked the question Coe had been dreading. Grandmother, were you a traitor for helping Americans? Coe thought for a long moment before answering. I was a healer, that is all. The Americans understood something that we had forgotten in our pursuit of victory. They understood that every life has value, even the life of an enemy. That is not weakness. That is strength, the truest strength. And I am proud that I helped them save lives, even if those lives belonged to men who had fought against my country. Because in the end, we are all just human beings trying to survive. That is the truth that war tries to make us forget. But it is a truth worth remembering. Her granddaughter Yuki spoke up. Grandmother, I want to be a surgeon. Like you. Will you teach me? Coe smiled. You will be better than I ever was. You will have proper training, proper tools. You will not have to choose between duty and nationality. You will just be a doctor. And that is how it should be. Over the next 4 years, Coe and Dr. Hayes exchanged letters. They talked about their memories of that time. What had happened to the other nurses? What had happened to the soldiers they had saved? Crawford had become a teacher, Dr. Hayes wrote. devoted his life to peace education, taught students about the cost of war. Harper had become a counselor for veterans with PTSD, helping them process their trauma and guilt. Private Sullivan, the first patient Coe had helped save, had become a father of 5, a grandfather of 12. He sent his regards through Dr. Hayes, said he thought about the Japanese nurse who had saved his life every time he held one of his grandchildren. In December 1989, Coe received Dr. Hayes' final letter. The handwriting was shakier than before, the words harder to read. Dear Coe, it began, using her first name for the first time. I am dying, cancer. The doctors say I have perhaps 2 months. I want you to know that knowing you changed my life. You taught me that healing is not just about technique or knowledge. It is about seeing humanity in everyone, even those we are told to hate. I have one request. When I die, will you speak at my funeral? Must know it is asking a lot. The travel, the expense, the memories. But I want people to hear your story. I want them to understand what we built together in that hospital, that enemies can become colleagues, that hatred can transform into respect. Thank you for everything, for your skill, your courage, your mercy. Your friend Robert. Coe wanted to go, but she was 67 years old. The travel was expensive, her health was not perfect, and she was not sure she could face all those memories. But her children raised money together. Pooled resources. You must go, mother. This is important. This is history. In March 1990, Ko Tanaka boarded a plane to San Francisco, her first time back in America in 44 years. Her first time on an airplane. The world had changed so much. Japan was wealthy now, prosperous. The ruins were gone. The scars were mostly healed. But Ko still carried her scars, internal ones that no prosperity could erase. Dr. Hayes' family welcomed her at the airport. His son, now in his 50s, his grandchildren, dozens of former colleagues. They treated her like an honored guest, like a hero. It made Ko uncomfortable. She was not a hero. She was just a nurse who had done her job. The funeral service was held at a large church in San Francisco. Hundreds of people attended, former patients, former colleagues, family and friends, and all gathered to honor a man who had dedicated his life to healing. At the family's request, Ko spoke. She stood at the podium, 67 years old, speaking through Dr. Hayes' granddaughter, who had learned Japanese specifically for this occasion. In 1945, I was a prisoner of war, Ko began. Her voice was steady despite the emotions churning inside her. I expected execution. I received trust. I expected cruelty. I received respect. I expected to be seen as less than human. Instead, I was seen as a healer, as a professional, as a person whose skills and dedication mattered more than my nationality. Dr. Robert Hayes asked me a simple question: will you help us save lives? That question changed my life because he was not ordering me. He was asking me. He was trusting me. He was seeing me not as enemy, but as colleague. And in that moment, I understood something that war had tried to make me forget. We are all human. And humanity is stronger than any propaganda, any hatred, any war. I saved American lives, lives of men who had fought against my country, and I am proud of that. Not because I betrayed Japan, but because I honored my oath as a healer. Dr. Hayes taught me that healing transcends all boundaries. That mercy is not weakness, but the truest form of strength. And that lesson is his greatest legacy. Not the surgeries he performed, not the lives he saved, but the idea that even in humanity's darkest moments, we can choose to see each other's humanity. That is what I want to pass on to my grandchildren. That is what I hope you will pass on to yours. Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for trusting me, for seeing me, for teaching me. You saved my life in ways you never knew. The audience was silent except for the sound of people crying, American veterans weeping, former nurses embracing, strangers comforting strangers in the shared recognition of loss and gratitude. After the service, several elderly men approached Ko. She recognized their faces from photographs. Private James Sullivan, now 65, walking with a cane. Lieutenant James Crawford, now 85, his hair white, his face lined. Sergeant Thomas Harper, now 92, in a wheelchair pushed by his daughter. They thanked her, shook her hand, embraced her. These men whose lives she had saved 45 years ago. These former enemies who had become something else. Something without a name. Something that transcended the categories of friend and enemy. Crawford spoke first. You saved my life, and then you taught me how to live with what I had done. I have spent 45 years teaching children about peace, about the cost of war, about the mercy you showed me. I hope I have honored your example. Harper was next. You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. That day you taught me that forgiveness is possible, that hatred is a choice, that we can choose differently. I have tried to live that lesson ever since. That night, Co returned to Letterman Hospital. It had been converted to other uses now, but the building still stood. She walked through the halls where she had once worked, touched the walls, remembered. She stood in what used to be the surgical ward, closed her eyes, heard the ghosts of all those they had saved. American boys, Japanese nurses, Dr. Hayes's calm voice, Mary's translations. All of them part of a story that should not have been possible, but was. Co returned to Japan carrying something she had not had before. Peace, the knowledge that her choice had been right, that her father would have been proud, that healing had transcended hatred, that mercy had proven stronger than revenge. The years passed. Co lived quietly with her husband. Her story became known, featured in Japanese and American documentaries about reconciliation. She spoke at schools sometimes, told young people about choosing mercy, about seeing humanity in enemies. In 2005, Co was 83 years old. Heart failure. The doctor said weeks, maybe days. Her children and grandchildren gathered at her bedside in the hospital. A modern Japanese hospital with equipment and medicine that would have seemed like science fiction in 1945. Her granddaughter Yuki, now a surgeon, sat beside the bed. Grandmother, I performed my first solo surgery yesterday. A heart repair. Very complicated. And while I was working, I thought of you, of what you taught me. Ko's voice was weak but clear. What did you think? I thought a life is a life. That is all. That is enough. Ko squeezed her hand. Yes, that is all. That is enough. Ko's son asked, Mother, do you have any regrets? Ko thought for a long time. Only one. I wish I had told this story sooner. I wish I had not waited 40 years to speak about it. Because this story matters. It matters that people know enemies can become colleagues. Hatred can transform into respect. And mercy is always possible, even in war's darkest moments. Promise me you will keep telling this story. Promise me the children will know. They promised. Ko died 3 days later, surrounded by 3 generations. Her last words in English, the language she had learned from Mary so long ago. Life is life, that is all. That is enough. Ko's funeral was held in March 2005. Hundreds attended. Family, former patients, colleagues, students, and 3 elderly Americans who had traveled across the Pacific one final time. James Crawford, 85 years old. Thomas Harper, 92, in a wheelchair. And Mary Tanaka, 88, the translator who had made it all possible. Ko's granddaughter Yuki stood at the podium and read Dr. Hayes' 1985 letter aloud. The letter that had started Ko telling her story. The letter that had given her permission to be proud of what she had done. Then Yuki spoke. My grandmother taught me that a healer's oath transcends all boundaries. That we save lives not because of who people are, but because of who we are. She showed me that even in war, even when we are told to hate, we can choose mercy. We can choose humanity. Grandmother, you expected execution. You received trust. You expected cruelty. You received respect. You expected to be seen as less than human. You were seen as a healer. Thank you for teaching us. Thank you for showing us. Thank you for choosing life. Always life. The memorial altar held 3 photographs side by side. Ko's portrait from 1945, wearing surgical scrubs at Letterman Hospital. Next to it, Dr. Hayes' photograph from the same time. Next to that, the group photo of all 37 Japanese nurses and the American surgical staff, taken in February 1946 before repatriation. Everyone smiling. Former enemies, now colleagues. A moment of grace in humanity's darkest time. The 3 Americans stood before Ko's portrait for a long time saying silent goodbyes. Finally, Crawford spoke. She saved my life, and then she saved my soul. I hope we honored her example. Harper nodded. She taught us that forgiveness is possible, that hate is a choice, that we can choose differently. I hope we did. Mary, the last survivor of the American staff from Letterman Hospital, smiled through her tears. She taught us all that healing is stronger than hatred, that mercy is stronger than revenge, that humanity survives. Always. That is her legacy, and it is ours now to carry forward, to teach our children and grandchildren. That life is life. That is all. That is enough. They stood together in silence. Three elderly Americans paying respects to a Japanese nurse who had saved them all in different ways. 60 years after the hatred began, still carrying the lessons she had taught them, still choosing mercy over revenge, still choosing healing over hatred, still choosing life, always life, because that is what Kotanaka taught them. That is what she lived. That is what she believed until her last breath. Life is life. That is all. That is enough. Kotanaka is gone, but what she taught us remains. Life is life. That is all. That is enough. Never forget.